My aunt's last words weren't "I love you" or "goodbye." They were "check behind the mirror" in the bathroom. I thought she was delirious from the medication. But 3 days after her funeral, alone in her house, I found myself standing in front of that old mirror above the medicine cabinet. When I pulled it away from the wall, my hands started shaking. There was a hidden safe built into the wall, and inside it was evidence that changed everything I thought I knew about my life. My name is Kate Patterson and I'm 28 years old. Before we go on, like this video and let me know what time you're watching. I'm genuinely curious. My story starts when I was 8 years old, the night I nearly drowned in my family's swimming pool. Everyone said it was an accident, that I'd wandered out to the pool during one of my parents' dinner parties and fell in. My Aunt Helena saved me, pulled me out, and from that night forward, she fought to take custody of me. She claimed my parents were unfit, but they painted her as the unstable one. Somehow, she won. I lived with her for the next 20 years, and she was the only person who ever made me feel safe. But what I found in that safe proved that everything I remembered was a lie. The first thing I pulled out was a manila envelope marked Kate, pool incident evidence. Inside were medical records I'd never seen before. Lab results showing I had been drugged the night of the accident. Rohypnol in my system. I was 8 years old, and someone had drugged me. The hospital records showed bruising consistent with being held underwater, not accidental drowning. There were photographs of my unconscious body that I'd never seen, showing marks on my wrists and neck. And at the bottom of the pile was a handwritten note from my Aunt Helena. They tried to kill her for the inheritance. I have proof. I fell to the bathroom floor, the papers scattered around me. My parents, Robert and Vanessa Patterson, had tried to murder me when I was 8 years old. I spent the next 3 days going through everything in that safe. There were audio recordings my aunt had made, secret conversations she'd recorded during custody hearings. In one, I heard my father's voice saying, "The kid's a liability. She asks too many questions about her grandmother's will." In another, my mother responded, "If Helena hadn't pulled her out so fast, we wouldn't have this problem." But the most shocking discovery was a deed to lakefront property worth over $2 million. Property that had been left to me by my paternal grandmother when I was 6 years old. Property I never knew existed. My aunt had hidden it all these years, waiting for me to be old enough to claim it safely. The deed was in my name, had been since childhood, but my parents had been trying to have me declared dead to claim it for themselves. That's when I realized the pool incident wasn't random. It was attempted murder for money. But there was more. So much more. Hidden behind false backs in picture frames throughout Helena's house were additional documents, photographs, and recordings that painted a picture of systematic abuse and cover-ups spanning decades. In the frame by her bedroom window, I found copies of police reports that had been filed and then mysteriously withdrawn. Reports of suspicious deaths in our extended family, all ruled accidental, all involving substantial inheritances. My cousin Trevor, who I'd always trusted, had been feeding information to my parents about Helena's investigation. There were emails between them discussing how to handle the Helena problem and references to making her disappear quietly like the others. In the kitchen, behind a false back in the spice cabinet, I found Helena's personal journal detailing 20 years of investigation. She had suspected something was wrong from the moment I nearly drowned, but what she discovered was far worse than attempted murder. My parents were part of a network that had been systematically eliminating family members for their inheritances, making it look like accidents or natural causes. The journal revealed that my grandfather's heart attack at 52 had been induced by digitalis poisoning. My great-aunt's car accident was actually brake line tampering. My teenage cousin who died of an apparent drug overdose had never used drugs in his life. Each death had resulted in substantial financial gains for the surviving family members, primarily my parents and their associates. Helena had been building a case for the FBI, working with an agent named Sarah Blackwood. But 3 weeks before her death, she wrote in her journal that she suspected she was being poisoned. Her handwriting became increasingly erratic, and she mentioned strange symptoms that her doctors couldn't explain. Her final entry, dated just 2 days before she died, said simply, "They know. Kate is my only hope now." I needed answers, and I knew where to start. Dr. Marcus Holloway had been our family physician for years, the one who treated me the night of the drowning. I called his office, scheduled an appointment under a false name, and walked into his waiting room with a recording device hidden in my purse. When I told him who I was, his face went white. I showed him copies of the medical records from the safe, the ones showing he'd falsified my treatment report. He started sweating, his hands trembling as he looked at the evidence. That's when I turned on the recorder and asked him directly, "Did my parents pay you to cover up their attempt to murder me?" His confession came pouring out. He'd been in debt, facing bankruptcy, when my father approached him with $20,000 cash. All he had to do was omit the drug test results from my official medical record and report the incident as a simple accidental drowning. He said he'd regretted it for 20 years but was too scared to come forward. "But that wasn't the only time," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Your parents came to me whenever there was a family member who needed to die quietly. Heart attacks, strokes, sudden illnesses. I provided the means and covered up the evidence. Your grandfather, your great-aunt, your cousin Marcus. They're all dead because of me." He broke down completely, admitting to decades of medical murder for hire. But what shocked me most was when he revealed that Helena's death hadn't been natural either. My parents had been slowly poisoning her with thallium, a heavy metal that mimics the symptoms of various illnesses. Her doctors never thought to test for it because the poisoning was so gradual and expertly administered. I had my first piece of testimony, but it was more devastating than I'd ever imagined. Dr. Holloway wasn't the only one involved. My aunt's notes mentioned Dr. Rebecca Sinclair, a child psychologist who had evaluated me after the incident. According to Helena's research, Dr. Sinclair had tried to report suspected abuse but had been silenced. I tracked her down to a practice 3 states away. When I called Dr. Sinclair and explained who I was, she broke down crying over the phone. She agreed to meet me immediately. We met at a small cafe where she handed me a thick file she'd kept hidden for 20 years. Her original notes, photographs, and recordings from our sessions when I was 8 and 9 years old. "I tried to save you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I reported everything to Child Protective Services, to the police, to anyone who would listen. But your father had connections. Judge Morrison was his golf partner. The police chief owed him favors. They buried every report I filed." She showed me her original evaluation, the one that was never submitted to court. It detailed clear signs of physical and emotional abuse, evidence of trauma, and her professional opinion that I was in immediate danger. She had recommended immediate removal from my parents' custody, but somehow, none of her reports ever made it into the official case file. Dr. Sinclair also revealed something else. She had secretly recorded one of her meetings with my parents, where they had threatened her career if she continued to interfere. On that recording, my mother's voice was crystal clear: "Keep your mouth shut about Kate, or we'll make sure you never practice psychology again. And if you think we're bluffing, ask Dr. Williams what happened when he tried to report the Morrison boys' injuries." Dr. Williams, it turned out, had been another psychologist who tried to expose the network. He died in a home invasion that was never solved, just 2 weeks after filing a report about suspected child abuse in the Morrison family. I now had evidence of conspiracy, witness intimidation, and murder to cover up their crimes. But as I delved deeper into Helena's investigation, I discovered the scope was beyond anything I'd imagined. Hidden in her basement, behind a false wall, I found boxes of documents dating back 30 years. Financial records showing money laundering through various charities and businesses. Photographs of children who had died in accidents but whose bodies were never properly autopsied. Medical records that had been falsified by multiple doctors in the network. The most chilling discovery was a ledger in my father's handwriting, detailing payments made for various services. Next to each entry was a date and a name. I cross-referenced the names with obituaries and found that every single person on that list had died within 2 weeks of the payment being made. The amounts ranged from $5,000 for simple accidents to $50,000 for complex eliminations requiring medical cover-up. My parents weren't just murderers. They were running a murder-for-hire operation that had been active for 3 decades. Among the documents was correspondence with someone identified only as the judge. Based on the context and Helena's notes, this was Judge Harrison Morrison, the same man Dr. Sinclair had mentioned. He had been fixing legal proceedings, ensuring that investigations were dropped and evidence disappeared. But there was also mention of someone called the cleaner, who handled the actual elimination of problems. I found surveillance photographs Helena had taken of this person meeting with my parents. The images were grainy, but clear enough to show a tall man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek. Helena's notes identified him as Vincent Cross, a former military contractor who specialized in making murders look like accidents. Cross had been responsible for at least 12 deaths in our area over the past decade, all designed to look natural or accidental. He used methods ranging from digitalis poisoning to brake line tampering to staged home invasions. According to Helena's research, he charged between $20,000 and $100,000 per elimination, depending on the complexity required. Armed with this growing mountain of evidence, I decided to confront the past more directly. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. I drove to the lakefront property that was supposedly mine, the one worth $2 million. What I found there made me understand why my parents had been so desperate to kill me. The property wasn't just valuable real estate. It was the operational headquarters of their entire criminal network. Hidden beneath the main house was an underground facility with multiple rooms. One was clearly set up as a medical facility where Dr. Holloway and others had performed procedures on victims. Another contained surveillance equipment and files on hundreds of potential targets. A third room was filled with chemicals and equipment for manufacturing untraceable poisons. But the most horrifying discovery was in the final room. It was set up like a nursery, with cribs and children's furniture, but the walls were lined with photographs of children who had disappeared over the years. Some I recognized from missing person reports. Others were children who had supposedly died in accidents while in foster care or temporary custody. This wasn't just about inheritance fraud. My parents were involved in child trafficking. I found records showing that they operated a fake charity called Safe Harbor Children's Foundation, which claimed to help troubled youth. In reality, they were acquiring children through legal channels, then either selling them to buyers or eliminating them when they became liabilities. The lakefront property served as a processing center where children were held before being moved to their final destinations. Among the files, I found intake records for dozens of children, including detailed psychological profiles and medical information. Some files were marked completed with dates that corresponded to obituaries of children who had allegedly died in accidents. Others were marked transferred with codes that led to addresses across the country. The most shocking discovery was my own file. According to the documents, I wasn't actually Robert and Vanessa Patterson's biological daughter. I had been acquired through their trafficking operation when I was 6 months old. My real parents, David and Sarah Morrison, had been environmental activists who were murdered when they threatened to expose illegal dumping by Patterson Industries. The file contained photographs of my biological parents, letters they had written to authorities about the environmental crimes, and documentation of the car accident that killed them. It wasn't an accident. Vincent Cross had tampered with their brakes after they refused to back down from their investigation. I had been trafficked to the Pattersons as an infant, raised by my own parents' killers, and then nearly murdered by them when I became inconvenient. The property I was supposed to inherit had been purchased with money from the environmental crimes my real parents died trying to expose. But there was more. Hidden in the deepest part of the underground facility, I found evidence that the network extended far beyond my family. There were records of payments to and from politicians, judges, police officers, and social workers across 3 states. Child Protective Services workers were being paid to place children with network families. Judges were being bribed to approve adoptions and seal records. Police officers were covering up investigations and evidence. The network had infiltrated every system designed to protect children, turning them into procurement mechanisms for their trafficking operation. Among the political figures involved was State Senator William Blackstone, who had been advocating for streamlined adoption processes and reducing bureaucratic barriers to child placement. His legislation had made it easier for the network to acquire children legally while making it harder for authorities to track what happened to them afterward. There were also records showing payments to Dr. Angela Morrison at the State Medical Examiner's Office. She had been falsifying autopsy reports for children who died in network custody, covering up evidence of abuse and murder. Over 50 children had been processed through her office with fraudulent causes of death. The scope was staggering. This wasn't just a family business. It was a statewide criminal organization with tentacles reaching into every level of government and law enforcement. I photographed everything, uploaded it to secure cloud storage, and made multiple backup copies. Then I called the number Helena had left for FBI agent Sarah Blackwood. When I reached Agent Blackwood, she already knew who I was. "Helena told me this day would come," she said. "How much have you found?" I spent 4 hours on the phone with her, detailing everything I'd discovered. She arranged for federal marshals to transport me to a safe location while a joint task force was assembled. The evidence I'd found would be enough to bring down the entire network, but it would also make me the most wanted target they'd ever had. "Kate," Agent Blackwood told me, "what you've uncovered is the largest child trafficking and murder conspiracy we've ever investigated. There are people at every level of government who will do anything to keep this from coming to light. From this moment forward, your life is in constant danger." That night, in federal protection, I continued going through Helena's evidence. I found records showing that the network had been operating for over 40 years, starting with my grandfather's generation. What began as simple insurance fraud had evolved into a multi-million-dollar operation involving murder for hire, child trafficking, political corruption, and organized crime. The financial records showed annual revenues of over $20 million from all their various criminal enterprises. They had legitimate businesses that served as fronts, charitable organizations that provided cover for their trafficking operations, and political connections that ensured their continued protection. But Helena had been more than just an investigator. She had been systematically documenting everything, creating a comprehensive case that would be impossible to dismiss or cover up. She had recorded conversations, obtained financial records, and even infiltrated some of their meetings by posing as a potential client. In one particularly damning recording, I heard my father discussing the elimination of a social worker who had become suspicious about children disappearing from network families. The conversation took place just 3 weeks before the social worker died in what was reported as a random mugging gone wrong. Agent Blackwood called me with updates as the task force prepared their operation. "We're coordinating with authorities in 7 states. This is going to be the largest simultaneous raid in FBI history. But Kate, there's something else you need to know." She revealed that Helena's investigation had been compromised from the beginning. Someone inside the FBI had been feeding information to the network, which was why Helena had been working so carefully and secretly. Agent Blackwood had been conducting her own parallel investigation, trying to identify the leak while building the case against the network. The leak was Deputy Director Michael Cross, Vincent Cross's older brother. He had been protecting the network for over a decade, ensuring that investigations were misdirected and evidence disappeared. Helena had discovered the connection just before her death, which was why she had accelerated her timeline and hidden everything for me to find. "Your aunt knew she was going to be killed," Agent Blackwood told me. "She spent her final weeks making sure you would have everything needed to finish what she started." 3 days later, Operation Safe Harbor began. Simultaneous raids took place across 7 states, targeting over 150 individuals connected to the network. My parents were arrested at their home, along with Judge Morrison, Deputy Director Cross, and dozens of other conspirators. But the network fought back immediately. Within hours of the arrests, several key witnesses died in apparent accidents or suicides. Dr. Holloway was found dead in his cell, officially ruled a suicide but clearly murdered to prevent his testimony. 2 social workers who had been cooperating with the investigation died in a car accident while being transported to a safe location. The network had contingency plans for exactly this scenario, including the elimination of anyone who could provide testimony against them. Agent Blackwood moved me to a higher level of protection as it became clear that the surviving network members would stop at nothing to prevent the truth from coming out. But Helena had anticipated this too. Hidden in the final safe I found in her house was a dead man's switch she had created. If she died under suspicious circumstances, sealed envelopes would be automatically delivered to news organizations across the country, containing summaries of the evidence and instructions on where to find the complete files. The story broke simultaneously on every major network. Decades-long child trafficking network exposed in federal raids. The evidence was too overwhelming and too well documented for the network's remaining allies to suppress. As the details emerged, the public reaction was explosive. Protests erupted outside courthouses where network members were being held. Politicians who had been connected to the network began resigning in disgrace. The entire child protection system in 3 states was placed under federal oversight while investigations determined the full extent of the corruption. But the network's retaliation escalated as well. The safe house where I was staying was attacked by armed men who were clearly professional killers. Federal marshals fought a running gun battle to get me to safety, and 3 officers were wounded in the process. Vincent Cross, who had managed to evade the initial raids, was directing a campaign to eliminate me and any other surviving witnesses. Agent Blackwood made the decision to fake my death. Using a body from the morgue and dental records that had been altered years earlier during my childhood medical care, they staged a car accident that appeared to kill me. The deception bought us time while the investigation continued and the trials were prepared. For 6 months, I lived under a completely false identity while working with prosecutors to build the cases against the network members. The evidence Helena had gathered was supplemented by testimony from survivors who had finally felt safe enough to come forward. We identified over 200 children who had been trafficked through the network over 4 decades. Some had been killed when they became liabilities. Others had been sold to buyers across the country and around the world. A few, like me, had been placed with network families for specific purposes like inheritance fraud. The trials began 2 years after the initial raids. By then, the investigation had expanded to include international trafficking connections and had resulted in arrests in 12 countries. The network had been selling children to buyers in Europe, Asia, and South America, with some being used for forced labor, others for sexual exploitation, and some simply murdered for the organs. My testimony was delivered via secure video link from an undisclosed location. I spent 3 days detailing everything I had discovered, showing the evidence Helena had collected, and explaining how the network had operated for decades. The defendants, including my parents, sat in stunned silence as the full scope of their crimes was laid bare. Robert Patterson was sentenced to life without parole for multiple counts of murder, child trafficking, and conspiracy. Vanessa Patterson received the same sentence. Judge Morrison died of a heart attack during the trial, but not before being convicted on all counts. Vincent Cross was sentenced to death after being convicted of personally carrying out 17 murders. But the most satisfying conviction was Deputy Director Cross. The FBI agent who had protected the network for years was sentenced to life in prison, and his conviction led to a complete overhaul of FBI internal security procedures. The trials resulted in over 300 convictions across all levels of the network. Politicians, judges, police officers, social workers, doctors, and business leaders all faced justice for their roles in the conspiracy. Several committed suicide rather than face trial, but the evidence against them was presented anyway to ensure the complete truth was revealed. During the trials, we also located 17 children who had been trafficked by the network but were still alive. Some had been rescued from buyers who were arrested in the investigation. Others had managed to escape on their own and had been living in hiding. Each reunion was both heartbreaking and healing as families were slowly put back together. One of those children was my younger brother, David Morrison, who I had never known existed. He had been trafficked to a different family when he was 3 years old, after our biological parents were murdered. Like me, he had been nearly killed when he became inconvenient, but he had managed to escape and had been living on the streets for years. The reunion with David was the first time I felt truly complete. We had both survived the network's attempts to destroy us, and now we could heal together while working to help other survivors. With the network dismantled and justice served, I was able to emerge from hiding and reclaim my life. But I chose to keep the name Kate Patterson rather than reverting to Morrison. The name represented my survival and my transformation from victim to victor. I used the money from the lakefront property and legal settlements to establish the Helena Patterson Foundation for Missing and Exploited Children. David joined me in running it, and together we've helped locate over 400 missing children and provided support services for trafficking survivors. The foundation operates the facility that was once the network's headquarters, now converted into a residential treatment center for child trafficking survivors. We provide therapy, education, legal support, and family reunification services. The underground rooms that once held children captive are now used for secure counseling sessions and art therapy programs. We also work with law enforcement agencies around the world to identify and rescue trafficked children. The network's files provided leads that are still being investigated years later, and new victims are being identified regularly. Helena's investigation materials are now housed in a secure archive at the Foundation, serving as a resource for researchers and investigators working on other trafficking cases. Her methods of documentation and evidence collection have become standard procedure for similar investigations. But perhaps the most important work we do is prevention. We've developed educational programs for schools, training materials for social workers, and awareness campaigns for parents. The network was able to operate for decades because people didn't know what signs to look for or how to report suspicious activities. 3 years after the trials ended, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before, me and David as toddlers, sitting with our biological parents in what looked like a park. On the back, someone had written, "They would be proud of who you've become." To this day, I don't know who sent it. But it reminds me that our real parents' fight for justice didn't end when they were murdered. It continued through Helena, through the FBI agents who risked their lives to expose the truth, and through every survivor who chose to speak rather than remain silent. The organization that tried to destroy us ultimately created the very people who brought them down. They turned victims into warriors, and that was their fatal mistake. We didn't just survive their attempt to erase us. We made sure they could never hurt anyone else again. That's the real power of truth. It doesn't just set you free. It gives you the strength to free others. David and I continue to find survivors from the network, and each reunion reminds us why this work is so important. Some survivors have gone on to become therapists, social workers, and advocates themselves. Others have chosen quiet lives focused on healing and recovery. All of them represent victories against a system that tried to treat children as disposable commodities. The Foundation has now helped reunite over 60 families, provided residential treatment to more than 200 survivors, and trained over 3,000 professionals to recognize and respond to trafficking situations. We've also worked with legislators to strengthen child protection laws and close the loopholes the network exploited. But the work continues. We estimate that the network trafficked over 1,000 children during its 40 years of operation, and we're still working to identify and locate survivors. Some cases go cold, but we never stop looking. Helena taught me that persistence and careful documentation can overcome even the most powerful conspiracies. The nightmares still come sometimes, but they're balanced now by the knowledge that we turned our trauma into something that protects others. Every child we help find, every family we reunite, every survivor who finds healing represents a victory against the darkness that tried to consume us. If you're watching this and you're hiding from your own truth, remember, the people who hurt you count on your silence. They count on your fear. But you're stronger than you know, and you're not alone. The Foundation continues to grow, and every day we help another family reunite or another survivor heal. What started as a hidden safe behind a bathroom mirror became a nationwide effort to protect children and expose corruption. Sometimes justice takes 20 years to arrive. But it always arrives. And if you're one of the people who covered up crimes, who looked the other way, who chose money over children's lives, we're still looking for you. The truth has a long memory, and it's patient. But it never stops hunting. If this story reached you, like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your engagement helps us reach more people who might need our Foundation's services. Subscribe for more stories of survival, justice, and truth. Because everyone deserves to know that no matter how powerful the people hurting you seem, they're not stronger than the truth. And the truth always wins in the end.